Hi, folks. Welcome in. We'll just give 2 or 3 minutes for everybody to join in, and we'll start fairly promptly. So we'll catch you in a few minutes here. And just to check, we got a screen share up right now, just as a thumbs up if you guys can see it okay. Ignacio, Ira, you guys are able to see the screen share?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you, folks. 2 more minutes and we'll kick this off. Just a few more people joining in right now. I think we need some background music for these in the future. That'd be a little bit fun to keep everyone entertained for it.
Like some kind of elevator music or something like that.
Exactly.
Yep.
Okay, 30 seconds and we'll get this kicked off and get things going. Okay, welcome everyone to the nice little interactive webinar that we're putting on today. We'll be talking about what we call hybrid offshoring in Argentina. And we'll dive right in here and I'll give you a bit of an overview. So you can see our agenda here and we'll dive in pretty quickly. Really, there's 2 goals that we wanted to talk about today. So today we're not here to do a pitch. There's nothing like that. We wanted to walk it through. What's the experience look like for someone that wants to be able to set this up and be able to get it really running and comfortable in their organization? So there's really 2 goals that we had. One is we see a lot of offshores being set up when we just throw work over the side. It's the stuff that we don't want, the things we don't care about, and it's looked as like a low cost center. And we think there's a better way to do this where you can actually make them a real strategic part of their team. So that's goal number 1. How do you set this up so that, hey, like you actually trust these people, it works well, they know you can grow it. Second part is we find there's, I don't know if you're like me, like I get about like 10 emails a week on different options that you have for this. And a lot of companies that we've worked with, they're drowning in options. So we wanted to set up a little bit of framework that you can think through as you're going through this. Hey, how do I make a decision? How do I like trust the decision that I've made when there's so many options that are available? From the other side, there'll be a quick survey that goes out at the end. So the Zoom should provide the link at the end, and then we'll have a follow-up email. So just a really quick survey, just tell us what you thought. We'd really appreciate any of the feedback for it. And we've got $500 in AWS credits. So if you fill out the survey, just check yes that you're interested, then one of the participants will be able to get that. So I'll kick it off first, just a chance to quickly meet the panelists that we have here today. So Rahul, I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks, Steve. So great to meet everybody on the webinar. My name is Rahul Nirula. Background, CPO in both very many lives. So from scale up to startup to scale up to enterprise innovation teams. Been in B2B SaaS and even B2C marketplaces. So had a wide variety of experiences, and I'm really looking forward to sharing my thoughts on this topic today. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you. Well, my name is Eira Martinez. Nice to meet you all in the meeting. And I work with Crombie on everything related to the first scene of customer. I work in pre-sales, technical pre-sales, and also I make sure that every team that we just set up here at Crombie is the correct team for your business and for your project in the future. I work with customer success also, so I make sure that everything related to that team it's going well, and I prevent problems in the future to happen here at Crombie also. Everything related to new technology and new innovation things that happen in the company in general.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ignacio Musthafa. Everyone calls me Nacho. And before introducing myself, I'd like to thank Steve, Eira, and Rahul for letting me be part of this incredible webinar. Such an honor to be here sharing experiences. So for the last 2 years, I've been working as a full stack developer in Crombie. And what I really like about working as a developer is having a crazy idea and trying to bring that idea alive. And I think a skill that I do have is communication and connecting with people. So language is pretty much the bridge that I use to bring those ideas and to the real world. So pretty much that's it all from my side. And thank you for having me here.
Awesome. And my name is Steve Henry. So just a quick background on me. In my past life, I was a CTO. So I've worked in consulting firms. I've worked in startups. We've been through some exits before. Actually, just to add a little clarity to make sure it's clear here, we've actually got 3 different groups that we brought in today, and this is very intentional. So Rahul's worked in different startups. Eira and Nacho work in an offshore firm in Argentina. And I have a separate entity as well, too, where we actually work with founders and startups. And a big part of how we wanted to do this was to get different views from different people and how they actually work together. The big theme for me, because we're all going to focus on a bit of different areas, is having done this enough times, I like to see these things more repeatable. So most of the stuff that you'll hear from me today we know that everything's a little bit different for every situation, but a lot of the fundamentals are the same. I'm very interested in those fundamentals that we can just say, look, just do this the way we did it before. We're not the first ones to do it. And really quickly, as we dive into this, I think there's 2 contexts that we wanted to talk about here. So one, I like to call this hybrid offshoring. And what I mean by that is, this is how you set it up so that you have a mix of, your own team in-house. You might have some local partners you're working with, and then you have your offshore team as well. And that whole collective group you can view is your product engineering team together. And they've got different areas of ownership as well. The main thing that we wanted to do, so to start with a bit of a framework, I see this as 4 phases that you can think about, and that's what we'll actually spend the webinar talking about today. So the first one is partner selection, right? So you've got a whole bunch of options there. How do you pick someone? What really matters? What do you want to think about when you're picking who your offshore partner is going to be? Second one, and I find the next 2 here are missed a lot, is around preparation. And this is what we'll be talking about, the contracting phase, but what else can be done in there, not just on the legal terms, finance terms, like how do we actually set this up so that how we're going to work together? What are the other things that matter that are typically missed? And then we find out later on, and it causes a whole bunch of mayhem for everyone. Then we'll get into onboarding. So your first month or 2, right? What do we actually do when we get started to set this up for success? And then ongoing, so 12 months later, how do we make sure this is actually a successful part of the team? And then as we're doing this, we will have the same flow for all of them. So the flow is going to be, Rahul is going to go first. He's going to give the lens from a CPO, so from a chief product officer. Then we're going to go talk to Eira and Nacho. They're going to give a bit of a lens from what they feel is important from the offshore development team. And I'm going to give a bit of a lens from the founder, what we're thinking about. And for each of these topics, you're going to hear from all 3 of us. So that's the structure for this. We'll dive right in. So the first thing that we're going to dive in right now is, so this is part 1. We're selecting a vendor. Rahul, I'll throw it to you in terms of what's really important to you when you're selecting an offshore partner. Like, what do people forget about? What do you really look for?
Yeah, Steve, I'm working under the premise of what Steve started this all about, right? That this is not a tactical, hey, get something quickly, cheaply done, or have that mentality, that this is something that is a very strategic approach to actually scaling your business, right? And so with that premise, I'm not looking for a partner who is just saying, hey, how can I quickly get in here, make a quick buck, get out? I'm looking for that partner for the longer term, right? So I'm looking for language that shows that commitment, right? To really want to dig in, to understand my vision, really get to know who are members of my team. Where do I have gaps in my skill sets? When I start to hear those sort of feelings of, that sort of depth of that commitment, then that gives me the confidence here that, this is going to be a strategic partner, right? And so, and then the other bit is that longer term perspective, right? So, seeing and feeling projects that they might have done that have not just been, 1 quarter or 2 quarter, where they've really dug in with another partner in the past. Those are going to be things that are really going to anchor me. So again, it's the premise that Steve started this with, is that this is not a tactical quick thing and out or sort of thing. We're going to dig in and really make this a strategic part of our business. I want to see language and I want to see that commitment to get to know every element of my business in relation to that.
That's great, Rahul. So yeah, from our side, I think one of the most important things to see is who's supporting the team behind the scenes. And what I mean about this is, do they have someone interested in keeping that team long term? For example, in the well-being area, do they have someone that talks frequently with that team to make sure that they feel comfortable in that project, that will stay longer in that project? Also, I would seek if there's anyone overviewing every project in that company, or because as Rahul said, you don't want someone that just comes in and goes away as soon as possible when they finish that project. You want someone that stays for long term. And you want to see who's there long term, who's there overseeing that everything goes for that long term, not just the specific dev that was assigned to your project. Who's there? Who's that company behind that specific dev, for example?
All right. So have you ever had a customer that comes to you super excited with an idea or this project they want to build? Okay. So pretty much here is where honesty and setting expectations is super important. The way I like to approach it with my customers is first to identify two things. I like to identify the purpose, the need, and the desire that the application it's gonna solve or want to achieve. It's pretty much the driving force that is behind this product. And once you have that, I like to move to the technical part where you decide what infrastructure, what technology we're going to use. And when you have that package compressed and done, you're ready to set up expectations. And the way I like to visualize this is you're just about to start a journey with someone. So you better try to be as clear as possible in order to make the process enjoyable. So pretty much that's it from my side.
Nice. And from my side, I have a much longer list of things that I actually look at here for it. The ones that I wanted to focus on here are what I'm going to call something that's a little bit less tangible for it, because I find that there's so many, like I said, there's so many options out there. Making that decision, a lot of it at the end of the day, there are a checklist you can run through, but intuition really matters as well. So I call them the 3 no's, and I mean KNOW. So 3 things I look for. Number 1, I look for shops that have built more than MVPs. And what I mean by this is, a lot of times, like we said, people pick an offshore partner, they throw them some quick work, some project work, or, some of the things they don't really care about. That's substantially different than how you actually build a SaaS platform that you're going to build and scale and grow. In 5 years, this still needs to work. In 10 years, this still needs to work. You need to be able to maintain this, monitor this, deploy this live into production. That's very different than being able to really quickly whip out an MVP. So that's one of the biggest things I look for. If they haven't done that before, they're probably not going to be the right fit for what you're looking for. Second one, and this one's very interesting. I look at how well does the team know each other. And the reason I say this is there's different ways that offshore companies are going to be set up. A lot of them, for example, all the people that they have are generally staff. So when you call them, what they do is they're actually just going behind the scenes and they're doing a whole bunch of cold BDR, looking for all the devs that they can find. So when they find them, you might find some decent talent, but there's very little oversight. There could be a lot less leadership, maybe one smooth talker that helps manage the relationship a little bit. Very often, none of these people have ever met each other before. And I don't mean that this is bad, that, hey, you have to go to market and sometimes there's some new people that you're going to bring in. But if this company, their entire model is, I'm just going to find you new people, that's almost like a staff hog exercise. It's going to be much harder for them to be a part of the culture be a part of the team, understand the product, be able to kind of like work together, ever be in the same room. So I think that's a very interesting one to look for. Is, does the team know each other? Do a lot of these people work together before? Is there more going on, or am I just finding labor in a cheaper spot? Very different. The last one that I look at is how well they get to know you. And I think this is what Nacho and Eira and Rahul were referring to, is their ability to be more than just developers. Like I like to see examples that I'm kind of looking for, and it is a bit of a feeling. But as they're telling their stories, what they're good at, and you can ask them leading questions for this, how well do they know their clients, right? How do they know the projects that they were working for, the business outcomes from this, what their vision is, the roadmap, what they're trying to see? Or are they just sitting there picking from a backlog? If you've got the first one, I think that's a lot more like, it's going to feel a lot more like your team, where they understand it, they can find mistakes, they can think ahead, they can extrapolate, they can pull things together. Oh, these are actually all very related. I'm going to design the database differently because I understand it. So those are the kind of the three knows that I look at. If they built more than MVP, do they know each other? Do they know you? Next piece I'll dive into. So at this point, let's say you've gone through, you've worked through all the mess, you've picked a vendor, you've found someone that like, I feel comfortable working with this. And then contracting comes out, right? A lot of times this can take a month or two to actually get this all done. I find there's more that you can do during this than just write legal and finance terms. So Rahul, kind of the question I'll throw to you here first is, when you're in this contracting phase and getting set up, is there more that product and engineering can do during this? Or, do you just kind of sit back and wait for the contract to be done?
Yeah, no, I think, Steve, there's a lot we can do here, right? And I think, it leads into some of the themes that Nacho and Eira were talking about around honesty and collaborating with each other, right? I think one of the things is, documenting a little bit of how the process works and, a commitment to adhere to that process, right? That's an interesting element that, I've done in the past that I felt has, set everything up. Like, in a way, you start to, get a lot of clarity around the friction of where things can happen right in this, if you start to have this up front. And I think this is just about, being a very genuine partner, right? If you approach these things with saying, okay, this is how we operate, this is how our process is, and we're going to document this, and we expect an adherence to that. I don't think many partners that are worth their salt are going to say no, right? Like, they're going to want to dig in here. They're going to ask some good questions because there could be things around SLAs and things like that that kind of lead into that. But in just understanding, and again, I keep coming and harking back to the beginning of this whole webinar about the premise around this, or the feeling around this, is truly making this a strategic partnership, right? And so if you dig in around the process, document that, and then talk about some of the rituals that we do as a team, and the expectation to be a member of those rituals, I think that can be really, a good part that can be documented and be pretty clear to say, hey, we expect a certain level of adherence, right? Or we're going to work around the mechanics of what adherence looks like, right? And so I think that's an important thing to have up front. And I think that's, really going to lead into quite a bit to what you're going to probably talk about, Steve, later on.
Yeah, and Rahul, if I play this back to you, are you suggesting that a lot of the process and structure that you guys will follow, you guys can bake that into the contract as well?
Yeah, like, I think there's elements to that for sure, right? Because I think if you think about it, it sort of taps into other themes that are going to naturally come in, around availability and expectations around performance, et cetera, right? If we say that, as a product leader and engineering leader myself, we say that following a playbook or a process is how we know predictability and how we know our team is actually performing. Why wouldn't we want that with that expectation to be laid out very clearly with our offshore partner, right? I think it's just a really pragmatic way of operating, right? Like, let's level the playing field, and then it doesn't become a thing where, hey, we did one element of the process, you didn't. Like, no, let's start talking about this is our process, right? And that's a mindset shift that becomes, then you start to see that this cohesion around accountability and delivery and execution and excellence around that, and just becomes naturally happening. If you have like apples and oranges in the way of how we think of these things, then it's never going to be a good situation, right? So let's both talk in apples here, right? And that just makes it easier. So I think documenting it, being really clear about what this is up front, and sort of working through what adherence to that means. Because you might have time zone differences or even sometimes language issues or whatever the case might be. That's okay. Let's have it out, and we can figure out where the middle of that adherence to that process is, right? If I use that as an example.
I like that. So you make it nice and clear. It's written down. You make it our process.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I like that in this specific part, in the preparing part, is where you set up the expectations. We say here that expectations is everything. And when you set up at the first beginning the expectations of what's going to happen before they happen, that's really good. That's why I say that what happens in an emergency is something that you would really want to talk in this point, because you don't want to have those hard talks when the problems are in place. You want to have those talks before they happen. And for that SLA, it's really good to have, okay, what is a critical situation? How do we define a critical situation? On which time do you want it solved? If it is critical, if it is minor, who defines which is critical, which is minor? Who do I contact? Those kind of things. You want to have that hard talk in this phase so you avoid problems on the future. That's a really good thing to start talking about, especially if you want that long-term relationship where you will talk about how we solve things as they go, as we discover new ones. But if you already have something in your mind of how you want to be handled, some things that arise or things that come up, it's really good to start that talk right now in this phase specifically.
So you're kind of defining ownership.
Yeah, ownership. And also, Rahul said, like, we are talking about apples and oranges. Well, we are talking about apples. This is apples. What is apples? That's our main thing here, to really write that down and understand, okay, we are talking about the same thing and we are talking about it right now.
Got it. Okay. So making it really clear who's responsible for what.
Yeah.
Okay, so regarding the supporting and maintenance phase, I like to share with you two things that I learned by working with one of my customers in this phase. So from one hand, you need, as a developer, you need to be flexible and be able to switch quickly from your regular task. For example, you're fixing bugs, you're doing some improvements, and you also need to be able to recognize quickly what are the important issues. For example, let's say your platform is already launched. For some reason, some of your AWS services are not working. And so you can identify that as a big issue. So then you can go fix that and go back to maintenance and supporting. And the second thing that I learned by working on this phase is you'd rather be delivering constant value than just trying to go and fix or improve everything at once. And that's something that your customer really appreciates, and it's super valuable.
Excellent. Okay, so I'll describe mine in a bit of an interesting way here. I talk about these from problems that I've seen running into this before. So first and foremost, I like to call this, when you're writing these contracts, I like to think of them in three separate sections to them. One of them is your legal terms, right? So all the legal stuff that you need to have in there, your lawyers are doing most of that. Financial terms, what does it cost? How do people get paid? This is where people are putting a lot of the emphasis. Everything that Eira, Nacho, and Rahul talked about, I like to call those operating terms. And I find that these operating terms are missed a lot. This is for me, this is the single biggest opportunity. This is how you're going to work together. So when they talked about, hey, who's doing after hours support? This is one of the biggest things that I've seen as a bit of a mistake that will happen. So there's two problems that run into this. One is from cost, and two is just from, like they said, expectations of the team. So if you haven't talked about this before, when you're setting this up, there's actually rules in different jurisdictions where, hey, you might need to pay overtime. You might need to pay overtime whether people are available or not. In that region, that may not be kind of normal for them. And actually the way that it's treated as well too, like with that team, and we talked about ownership before. If you give people ownership, I think they're going to be a lot more amenable. And sometimes you don't need to solve as much of that through contracting, but you've at least had that conversation before. So I really do find that really important. Talk about it before, see who's going to own things, what's going to happen after hours as well too, and make sure that, hey, if this is the team that you expect is going to build things, launch them into production and be responsible for them, you've had those conversations in advance, because that's going to change the nature of your relationship, and you don't want to find that out when you've launched in the prod and then you're having the discussion for the first time. Creates a lot of tension. The other piece that I'll note for this is the way that the team is onboarded. And as we're getting into the onboarding, we'll talk about this, but I think the one thing that you can do before is I always like to find who's going to be my team lead first. The reason I say this is as you're building out a team, think about how you would do this in-house as well. If I'm building a team in-house, I'd rather not just hire a bunch of mid-level and junior developers, but then have my dev manager or team lead come in later and say, hey, here's your team, enjoy, go deal with it, and go run this. I find it actually works much better the other way. So one of the discussions you can have during this phase is find out who's going to be leading the team from the offshore side or leading the pod as you're scaling it up. Make sure that person's identified because they can help pick the team. Everybody likes to be able to pick their team or be involved in the selection of their team. And then as soon as people come on, you have a leader to run that and look after it. So I will give that as the biggest piece of advice. If you've helped identify the lead, then you've got someone on the other side who's helping to roll this out. If you don't, and you throw a bunch of devs on it, you're kind of scattered first, and it can actually really delay things or make things messy, and someone else is going to have to pick up the slack later on. Okay, so moving on. So this is going to be phase 3 that we're talking about here. What we're doing in this phase, we've already picked a vendor. We've got everything contracted. At this point, boom, we're kicked off. So I'll throw it to you, Rahul. What do you find is most important in the first month together? You guys have kicked off. What do you care about making sure really happens?
So, I mean, this may sound crazy or not so crazy, but, I look at onboarding as, the same almost approach, maybe without some of the HR stuff, of how do you onboard a new employee, right? And so, and what does that generally entail? In most of my organizations, we start with the word context, right? Like we want to give as much context to our partner about why we're here, right? So things like our roadmap, our vision, like why are we waking up and going and solving these problems? We spend a chunk of time with any sort of offshore partner that we've ever worked with, doing real deep dives about the company history, how did we get here, the why, of what we're trying to accomplish, right? And that I have found to be so invaluable with these partners. I like the partners are like, like if you think about we're in this great profession of building amazing solutions. Generally, you're getting really talented folks to be part of this, right? And if that's the case, talented people, smart people, if they're going to make good decisions, they just need as much context around the problem as possible, right? So we spend a lot of time getting into that, right? And then if we've sort of identified what the mission of this particular team is to do, we spend a lot of time sort of collaborating around that and then starting to work around the process and rituals about how we're going to execute around that. Right now, we have a great amount of, from the previous phase, documented, steps about how we want to work. Right. So how do our sprints work? How do we do planning? How do we do our retros? All of those sort of things. We want to bring this team together and sort of have like a session on how we're going to actually work and mimic or actually follow the same processes that this existing team has already sort of taken on and made part of their culture, right? And with a partner that hopefully has bought into this perspective and really wants to dig in, they're really excited about this, right? Because now they're not being treated as this, weird third arm. They're actually part of the entity and really engaged in it, right? And then I think what naturally happens is there's a clear collaboration of how we're going to work the mechanics of these rituals or processes that that we might have to deal with maybe language or time zone issues or whatever the case might be. This is a great way of the team to sort of storm together, right? That you talk about team formation around storming and norming. Hey, like, we've presented a set of processes and rituals we want to do. These are the issues we might have around time zone, maybe technology, capabilities, whatever the case might be. Let's bring these worlds together and mash them together and figure out what works now as now this new combined hybrid entity, right? And what you generally find is that this really ties the team quite together, right? And then it's with that spirit of I've sort of highlighted here of genuinely feeling part of the team, right? I sort of said is that this should be an accelerator for your business, right? If people feel like they're part of the mission, they're really invested, they're naturally going to accelerate the learning and then the uptake of actually execution, right? So the more and more that you can do around this, I think this is really critical. So like I said, I go back to what I said at the beginning. I think you should be treating these folks as a genuine part of your team and following as much of the same onboarding practices that you might have as any new team member that is maybe you've internally hired.
I like that. Nacho, over to you.
Yep. So what really matters on the first month, from my perspective, is making sure everything is on the right track. Let me tell you more about what I mean by saying this. So you already set up the expectation with your customers, and now is the time where you're going to build the foundations. And so it's important to try to identify as quick as possible the building blocks that are going to be used among all your platforms. Let me give you a quick example. For example, on the front end, one time I was working with another developer, and we were on this project. It was a large platform where we would display a lot of information using tables. So we took some time to try to find what were the common things between all these tables, and we pretty much tried to write a maintainable and scalable code. So it might took some time, but in the future led to a better development, and it was easier for us to keep developing in the future. So this is a good moment to take a step back and try to think more about how you're going to do things and the impact that you're going to get in the future.
So Nacho, when you're doing that, is there a number of things from the dev side that you guys like to organize or plan out how you're going to do them before you really dive into it?
Could you expand the question, please?
Yeah, is there like so structures, how you're building out modules or like DevOps or those sort of pieces? Like where do you end up spending a lot of time building those out, or do you have another example of those?
Maybe I have more experience on the front end side. So what we really try to do is try to identify all the components among the platform. I just use the table example, but as the tables that are going to display the information, you will find a lot of things. You also need to get the designs right and how that is going to interact among all the platform. But I mean, we try to divide the work between the backend and the front end and see how we can make that scalable and maintainable for the future.
Gotcha. Okay. So you're looking for things like reusable components. So you're building things with those structures. You're not just hacking things together.
Yeah. Exactly.
Eira, over to you.
Sorry, now my microphone is on. So yeah, Nacho said something really important, that is the first beginning of how the code will look like. But I also want to see how that team will look like, or how they are working together alongside with our customers. One thing that Rahul mentioned is this is going to be a lot of people getting into your company again, like you treat them as another people coming to your company. So I want to make sure, and that first stage in that onboarding, that those people are actually going to click with their values and the way that that company works. I look through people's personality on that. I try to make that the teams are work together, are aligned with each other, but also with the customer. And sometimes there are customers that prefer to have more enthusiastic people on new proposals. Like they want new ways of work, and they comment about your process and how to improve it, and always making new comments about that. And sometimes there are customers there that prefer to have it this way because they have worked like this way with other people and they like it this way for their project. So they're pretty much like someone that can learn quickly that process and adapt to it. And that's kind of personality in some sense. And I always try to see who's on the other side. Do we have a specific tech person on the other side that wants to take this, that wants to make all the decisions? Or do we have someone which is more like a startup founder who has big dreams and wants someone who can put them into something actually deliverable in 2 weeks and not everything on what it could be, but what can be done in 2 weeks. So I really want to look into that, how that interaction works between our team and the team on the other side, how they can collaborate and unify with those personalities.
Nice. Okay. So I'm going to talk to just a very specific area. So this was interesting for me, and I'm going to give a bit more of a very specific lens around this. I like to call this the balance between pandering and discipline. And what I mean by that is I do find a lot of times, and not every CTO is going to agree with me on this, that I hear this view of, well, everybody can kind of use what their favorite things are, right? They can use different operating systems. They can use some different tools for things. When I'm looking at onboarding, I'm really looking at things from scale. And I like seeing everybody's using the same thing. I think that's really important. It's nice to have some flexibility for the people and how they do their job. We want to inspire that creativity. I don't think personally the best spot to do that is by using whatever you want. And what I have found behind the scenes, a lot of times when you're missing on your roadmap, when you're missing on deliverables, where you see things that work in dev and then they blow up in QA and they blow up in prod, and some of these can really be exacerbated by time zones and regions and people are in different spots, it's because they weren't doing things the same way. So a simple example from the tech side is you might find, you've got one team of people using Macs and you've got some other people that are using Windows. They could even be in the same team. When you're trying to build that and deploy it, the packages that are being run, the libraries, the binaries, they're going to be different. So this would explain a lot of times why if you see things like, hey, this worked for me, and then I checked it in and it blew up in one of the later environments, that could be part of the problem. Or maybe you've got one group of people that are using Docker containers when they work locally, but then when they actually, another group, I'm just running it directly on my machine. Or actually, instead of using Macs, I've got like a VM that's running Ubuntu, some version of Linux, and I'm running it there. And it's very similar, but not quite the same. So from my side, I find one of the things that just makes sure that this inconsistency doesn't happen, and it definitely sets you up for scale, is same tools, same equipment, same access, right? Set everyone up the same. And then when new people come on, it's a lot easier to get help. It's a lot easier to get set up. You're much better at that because everybody's doing the same thing. And if everything is consistent from that side, you're taking out a lot of the variability that's going to have those like hidden errors. And so when you're an executive, when you're product, when you're sales, and you're like, why are we missing the roadmap? This can be a very interesting one to explore. And the question I would ask them is everybody doing things exactly the same? If they're not, you could be losing a lot of time to that behind the scenes. You get those like errors that you don't know why they're happening, and then everybody gets distracted and pulled off onto them. So last piece that we'll go through here before we go into a couple of quick stories for this is, at this point, you've picked a team, you've gone and done through the contracting, you've set them up, you've onboarded them. It's 12 months later, right? Rahul, question I'll ask you is, what are you doing at this point to make sure these guys are actually a part of your team? Like they've been integrated, they can grow with you. You're not just hucking stuff over the fence.
Yeah, so I'm going to go out with the assumption that things are going well. And so, if they're not, then they're not going to be here, right? So if they are, I'm in the mode of like, okay, how do we now think about how do we do more, right? What strategic projects, instead of it being more of a assigned sort of thing, even though it could be a fairly, important or robust project to work on, how can we actually use this team if they've been part of it, getting the feeling, there's a lot of now built-in, know-how and IP that sort of happened in a year of collaborating with us, right? So you would think, why wouldn't we leverage that from an idea generation perspective, from, you know, actually looking at how we work better together from a process perspective? You know, those are the things I'm going to look for, you know, assuming that the work keeps coming and we keep scaling and growing, right? And then the other thing I talk about is like, you know, and I sort of mentioned here is collaborate on the unseen, right? Like there's clear about generating more product and doing, you know, and solving more problems, great. But how do we look about how do we do this more efficiently? From an architecture perspective, do we now involve you in a lot of those decisions a lot more now, right? Because trust has been earned, those coins have been accumulated. We see that know-how, we see that expertise. Why wouldn't we bring them into the, you know, into the tent even more to have, you know, more strategic directions from a technical perspective about where we might be going? Did we make some good decisions technically earlier before they arrived, or were we kind of off the mark now that we've scaled the business even more? And now with these new team members that we have, can we not leverage them to kind of go in an interesting direction, from a, you know, a back-end security, compliance, whatever the case might be, leverage some other things that we might not have known, right? So I think those are the things that really, I look to, you know, to double click on a lot more. And I think the key here is, you know, like what Steve's highlighted here is strategically, right? Like, I think that's what the aspect here is. 12 months is a long time to be committed, right? And if things are going really well, that means you should just keep going more, right? And you shouldn't be afraid to want to go deeper, right? And so then what does that mean? Is generally probably going to be getting a lot more strategic around those collaborations, right? So let's have those moments, let's do it, right?
Yeah. From my side, when I seen that dev team, when these things are all said that happen, that you want to bring them more, you want to bring them in your strategic planning, I usually see how invested that team is into that project. If you're 12 months in, the team has already built something, they have already launched something probably, and also they have probably brought their ideas into the project, and they have worked on a lot of things. So I want to see, okay, how invested they are, how they are seeing this project in 8 months, how they're seeing their work affecting everything related to the roadmap, how much ideas they are bringing to the table, how much they are hearing from other people. So those are like my green flags into this kind of projects, that I see, okay, if this person is really invested into the project, they will stay in that project. They will be proud of what they are building. And if they are proud of what they are building, they will try to make it even better, because to be proud of something that you build is something that makes you want to come and do it even better and to show it to everyone. Do they use that same application they were building? Do they recommend it to other friends? Do they so that sort of things that gives me that the green flags in there that knows, okay, this is good for the long term. This is the good people in this project for the long term. This is people that the client enjoys working, and this is a project that these people enjoy working into. So yeah, I would see into those things in there and make sure that that happens.
Okay. So from my side, I think after 12 months, you want to make sure you were smart enough to create a space where you can have interaction with your customer and get some feedback. Because at the end of the day, I think one of the deepest desire of any developers is just to bring an idea alive and see that on stage in our production. To make that happen, you got to be aware that maybe your customer is not going to say yes to everything, but it's nice to have that spot, because if you have that spot, is where the magic happens. Is you start developing like this sense of belonging, and you feel like, okay, I'm being part of a team, I feel listened, so my ideas have some value and have an impact on this project. So that's something you want to make sure you create.
Awesome. Okay, so I'll tell you an area where I like to focus for this. So this works the same for enterprise if you have projects that are going year over year as well too, and they're scaling and growing. If you're on the startup side, I think this is a little bit easier to articulate it. I like to think of the offshore teams you have as pods. And we do the same thing for the in-house teams as well too, right? So you've got, if you think about it as you scale, you wouldn't just have 20 developers, 50 developers, right? They're in like little groups, little teams. Let's call them pods for this example. And a pod for me is typically 5 or 6 people, right? So you've got a lead, a senior or two, intermediate or two, maybe 2 juniors in there, and something of that group, maybe a QA, they're working together. So what I'm looking for is, okay, for the first while you've run this, you've got this pod, they're able to run some initiatives, they've taken some ownership, like Rahul said, they've actually built stuff that's meaningful and works. But what I'm looking at next is, let's say you're raising your next round, right? So maybe you're doing a Series B. Have you planned to scale this up? So behind the scenes, and if you're a CTO, make sure you've got a view into this and you've been contributing to this. Your CEO is going to have an operating plan, right? And it's going to have the list of, here's the people we have, here's what they cost, here's their their title or seniority for it. Rather than just putting on dev number 1, 2, 3, maybe we'll add some extras for this. You can think of this as growing another pod. And so I do typically like growing the teams like that. So rather than just saying, oh, maybe we can put 3 more, or maybe we can put 15 devs on this, you're thinking them in actually organized pods. And then that way they can follow the same structure. Do what this team did, but do it over here. This is the initiative that you're going to run with and own, which also falls into the after hours support and all those other things if you have ownership around it. And from a cost budgeting side, you've got a nice mix of senior, intermediate, and junior. So you've got a cost basis that you're looking for, and you're not just trying to throw 15 senior people at everything. So where this ties into the fundraising is in the operating plan, you can actually plan to add another pod. You've thought about that in advance. And this does actually get missed a lot. Have that conversation with your offshore partner. Let them know where you're at in your funding round. Have you found a lead yet? When are you practically thinking of closing? And as you get closer, give them a heads up so they can actually start tying names to those roles and keep them as formed as you can be for the timing for that. Because people don't want to just sit on the bench, right? For you, like an extra month to close a round probably isn't a big deal. But for a developer to sit on their hands and do nothing for 4 weeks, like that's a huge motivation killer. And that's very difficult from an operating side as well, too, because you're not sure what's going to happen. Like you want to put them on something, though devs want to be doing work. So again, huge communication piece right there. The other piece that I'll put on for this that I find is really important is I really hate doing hourly work. So when you have your in-house teams, everybody has a fixed cost every month, right? You've got their salary, you divide it up, you pay them the same thing every month. It's very easy, very straightforward. From a payroll side, operating side, from a budgeting side, you know what it costs. What I don't like doing is having to review the hours of my offshore team every month. One, if I were the CTO, it's like just from a bit of a optics and gamesmanship standpoint, I actually find this can cause some friction because you're almost giving an opportunity for your CFO and your CEO to look at this every month and be like, oh, how much are we spending on this? Like you just don't want that front of mind for them. It's very nice and easy to say that if you've accounted for things like vacation time, maybe a few sick days that are in there, the structure of the team that you have, it's the same thing every month. They get paid the same amount. It's easy to structure and budget it. You don't have to do all this checking. Did you work that many hours? Did you not work that much? So just having it from a personal perspective, fixed budgets, fixed amounts each month. The only time that should change, in my view, is when you're adding people or removing people from the team. And it makes it so much easier as you're running it day to day and as you're planning for the future as well, too. The budgets that you plan for, they'll be accurate. If you're a CTO and you want to get the trust of your CEO, provide a budget that you actually stick to. And if you're going hourly and that means it's going to vary, you're putting yourself at risk from that point as well. So last piece that we'll have here for today, what I wanted to do is kind of just we've talked about the 4 phases that we go through. We wanted to just give you a little bit of here's a one-off story from each of us from something that we thought was kind of interesting that we went through and something important that we took away from it. So we can try and make this a little more tangible. So I'll throw it over to you, Rahul. What's one of your offshore stories that you want to share?
Yeah, I think one that stands out for me is, I phrased it as the startup within the startup, right? And so, I was at a scale up and, we had proven product market fit and we had a product line that was going and really executing well. But then we had a couple of ideas that we were thinking of, right? And we said, oh, okay, we can build like what Steve was saying, not just MVP, but we said, hey, let's use an offshore team to build this MVP because we didn't want to distract the onshore team about, not staying very focused on a very robust mission that we'd already done, right? And so we went ahead and found a partner, but we followed a lot of the principles that I've highlighted and Eira and Ignacio and Steve have highlighted in there, right? And we really approached it as, no, this is going to become a strategic partner, even though we were kind of building an MVP, but we approached it like, okay, no, they're going to really be, part of our mission here and prove something out. And we went through all the various steps that we sort of highlighted, documented everything, followed the same rituals. Now, one of the things was from a product perspective, we had a lead product person kind of manage that team and be the sort of the connective tissue to what we were trying to do from a product management perspective, right? So we had the pod, which was a lead engineer, some intermediates, a QA person, a DevOps person, and then we even had design was local as well as product management was local. So we had a very integrated team. And what we found was this team, because they had, they could leverage all the best practices and things that we'd already built from a culture perspective, but they, there was this element of them coming together and kind of working on the mechanics of how the team would work together to follow those rituals. They really became an amazing accelerator for us, right? And they actually became the example of how, when we were measuring performance of a pod and seeing how they were, even with time zone differences, and even some language, disconnects in some frames, but very minimal. But it was there. This team outperformed one of our, like a good vast majority of our internal teams, right? So this proved to me that with the right spirit and attitude of like, hey, I'm going to make this a strategic partnership. We're going to actually bring them on in the right way, give them the context that they need, use the same tools, the same processes that Steve sort of mentioned, not compromising there at all. They actually, from every measurable, did better. As a leader, I would look at teams and say, wow, this team is really, crushing it. So it was an amazing sort of story and validation of that, this can happen, right? And it can really be a powerful force for your team. And me as a leader thinking strategically of how I can just unlock and solve more things and hopefully return even more enterprise value back, right? Thanks, Steve.
That's really great. Well, from our side, we have the same story actually, because we will participate in this one. You see, when I mentioned that I like to see how dedicated a team is, I think about how Nacho once used his own family to bring to extra UX testing. And Nacho, I leave it to you to tell.
Yeah, that was a fun story. I mean, we were working with Eira and this customer, and he wasn't feeling super confident about launching the product. So then soon we realized with the team that he didn't want to launch because he wasn't getting any feedback. So I thought to myself, okay, I can get some feedback. So I spoke with the customer, and he allowed me to show the application to my family. So I went on a Sunday lunch. We were all sat together on the table, and they were having dessert. And I told my family, okay, guys, I'm going to need you for this. I'm going to run a little experiment. So they all grabbed their phones. I sent a link, and they registered on the platform, and they start interacting with them. So after, I think, 20 or 30 minutes, I got like a huge list of feedback. So after I got that, we went back with the customer, we showed him that, and he was super happy about it. And then we implemented, I think, 80% of those changes. 20%, we just kept it the way it was. But with that experiment, then we were able to launch to production, and it was a nice moment because the customer wasn't feeling confident, and after that feedback, he just got it.
And yeah, this particular customer had this was a passion project for him. It was what he did after his retirement. So he seen that the team that was working on this passion project got so engaged and so excited to get to launch on this project. He was really happy with that initiative. And Nacho was not the only one. Other devs also got really engaged into testing and giving proposals and everything into that specific application. And even our company started using it after it first launched. So I really like to see that in a well-managed team.
Nice. And by the way, we've got 5 minutes left in this, so I'll wrap this up as we quickly, so everybody's out at the top of the hour. The one thing I'll just note from those stories here that I think is helpful to emphasize is we'll talk separately another day about a more specific checklist. I think some of these here are a bit of what I would call intangibles. Like when you see a team doing things like this, right? They're taking it home. They're putting their extra time and effort into it. They're coming up with other ideas. That's a good indicator that you've done a good job. You've integrated them well. And you can't contract all of that in, but it's a great thing to look for. And a super quick example that I've been through before is I was brought in once for, this is an earlier stage startup that was working on it. They gave me a list. Here's 15 vendors that we're looking at right now. They've spent 6 months on this, which, by the way, 6 months at your burn rate for a startup, you do not have that time. They have not made a decision for this yet. And what was happening during this, they're like, how do I make a decision? And then their board of advisors, every time the CEO talks to one of them, there's another one being thrown on the list. And then their investors come up with another idea. And so that gets added to the list. And it just becomes this information overload. And what we were able to do is I actually came in for them. I played a role as an interim CTO. And what was helpful is, look, they've had really smart people on the team, but they just didn't know how to make decisions around this. And sometimes having someone come in that has relationships, that knows what to look for, that can explain it to an executive so they feel comfortable, but also just help you make a decision can be really helpful. So in a month, we quickly said, look, here's 3 that we're going to look at. Here's how I'm going to assess them. I'm going to make sure each of those are distinctively different. I'm going to tell you what I recommend from this and why, and then we're going to make a decision. And then we're going to pop right into contracting. We're going to pick a lead and we're going to get it going. And they were able to, suddenly get out of this like fatigue here, get everything contracted and selected within 4 or 5 weeks. And we had them started right after that. And they rolled out a really quick thing that they needed 6 weeks later so they could actually close their next round of funding. So take away from that, sometimes getting a little bit of help around this can be helpful. So the last piece here that I'll share, I'm going to see if I can I see there's a couple things in the Q&A. Okay, so quick question we had from the Q&A side. How do you ensure compliance with international data protection regulations?
I can answer this one. I have been working in our information security, information security team in Crombie. And I can tell you that international data protection regulations are a mess around the world because every country and even different states in the United States have different regulations under that. So what you would look first is their private policy. Most of companies have that in their website. They should have that in their websites. And you will try to look for if they know what it means, if they have done their research over that, and if they have any legal team or any specific person in that company that makes sure that data protection happens. Usually companies have like one specific person, one specific role into that. So you would try to look for that into a company. Yeah, that would be from the offshore side.
The only piece I'll add to this quick here is I think the biggest thing that you can look for is they care where their production data is being stored. That's going to be the most important spot. So you can look at that from 2 levels. Where is it stored and who's interacting with it? So typically, as long as it's stored in, so for example, the US or EU, like if you had to do multiple regions, then that's fine. That's kind of separate from your developers. Then the second part is, okay, who has access to the data? So it kind of depends how you set up. If you set this up such that people don't need to access your data on a regular basis, usually that can solve for it. Once in a while, you'll find maybe in for example, health scenarios, like in health tech, some people get a little bit more picky around that. And if you had to, then you can limit who has access to live production data within the teams that you have. And last question, just really quickly here, we're asked, regarding the talent pool in Argentina and typical cost savings versus working in the US. Rahul or anyone, did you guys have something you wanted to share?
I would say I don't have the exact numbers here, but I know it's cheaper to offshore here in Argentina. But it also the main advantages are not just the cost. Like difference in Argentina specifically, difference to other countries. What we usually have is more expertise. We have a lot of college people here, because a lot of countries in Latin America come to college here. In Argentina, we have higher education, really more set up here. So you usually find professionals with a little bit more level, and that in that sense. And also you will find that we are not so compliant to do this. I will just do it and not think about the consequence of doing it. We usually try to say our opinion on, okay, if you want to do this, that's okay, but you will face these consequences if we go that way. Maybe we should try this other way. So you will find a lot of that into the Argentinian people. We're really passionate about what we do. You will see that in football and in artists that come from Argentina, but also you will see it in the culture and the people in that. So you'll find that. And also I know that the time zone usually overlaps like 80% of the time. And that's usually a really high stake when thinking about offshoring a team, because if you have that 12-hour difference between your team and the offshore team, it's really uncomfortable to work with. So you will try to look for that. I think that it's not just the cost, because it is cheaper, but there are a lot of countries that are cheaper than the US in general. So you would try to look for other things too, apart from the cost itself.
Yeah, and for the last 60 seconds, just to wrap this up, because we're 1 minute over here. So thank you everyone for coming. What I'll just add to that is, so I'm actually down in Buenos Aires right now. The biggest thing that I found for this is English is going to be a lot stronger in Argentina than some of your other LATAM countries. So it is growing in the other spots, but having a strong English background is very common here. So that's going to make it easier. And I will find when you're looking at the rates, there's a very, very big difference between I want a strong developer and I want a strong developer with strong English skills. And you know, that could cause 3x, 4x, 5x in the price that you're going to pay. Whereas here it's going to work. So I would say, like, if I were to say a rule of thumb, and again, in the US, it matters. Are you in California? Or are you in Utah? But, you know, it could be half the price. You'll definitely be saving at least a third for it. Could be half, could be more than that. So it kind of depends a little bit on your cost basis for it. If you're competing with Google, yeah, you're going to, you know, it might be a third of the cost for it. If you have more standard pricing, maybe half, maybe a little bit more than that. Oh yeah, so the last piece I'd note here is Eira's mentioning, like, education is actually free, like, to go to the universities here. So you're seeing a lot more people that have been able to go through, have the education, both from a language side and from the technical side. And that's why you're going to see some more of that in Argentina, and more of that cultural familiarity. It's got a lot of that European feel to it. And from a time zone side, versus Eastern, you're 1 or 2 hours off. So I'll do a quick wrap up to this. Thank you everyone for joining this. This is everyone's information on here. Feel free to give us a ping after if you want to chat about any of these. Just soundboard what's going on for yourself. Get a bit of a feel for it. LinkedIn's a great way to find us. We'll send a follow-up email from this. There will be the survey link in that, so that you can, if you can just take 2 minutes, fill it out, you'll be eligible for the $500 in AWS credits. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining, and hope to hear from you more soon in the future.
Thank you,
Cheers.
everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.